Welcome everyone. Let me shift around here so I can get onto the screen. And we're going to show a slideshow. There we go. Today we're talking about the historical perspective of obesity. Obesity is an interesting subject matter, and certainly we know it right now. It's the number one health crisis in the United States. And from my perspective, we're talking about treating it. The talking heads are moving, but as far as actively doing something about it, we're not. We'll get into that later. It's a huge environmental issue. But in the meantime, I'd like to give you a decent perspective of the history of obesity in the world and the culture, of our mentality toward obesity. And I think it really helps you if you're trying to treat people and understand where to go from here and the influence in the past that have influenced our attitude or the way we've worked around the concept of obesity. So to start out, let's just define what we're talking about so we're talking on the same plane. Webster defines obesity as excessively fat, corpulent, overweight. Now, corpulent, there's a word we don't use very often. Corpulent is defined as large or bulky of body, portly, stout, fat. Okay, so here's a lot of words describing what we think is the same feature. And just to expand further, embonpoint means stout and plump. Pingendineous is fatty. Arbordupious, heaviness of weight. There's a long list of words we have to describe this same feature. Why in society do we have so many words for the same thing? It's of interest, and it's always been of interest to describe people. The concept of obesity refers to a whole being, not just areas of a person. So when we talk about somebody that's overweight or obese, we don't say the lady is obese. We do say the lady is obese, I should say. So we would say the lady is obese. We might also say she's fat, but we'd say the lady is obese. We don't say the lady has obese thighs, which is an interesting differentiation. You may be fat in your butt or fat in your bottom or your thighs, but we don't use obese usually in that terminology. Now, there are other concepts talking about the person with excessive adipose tissue. Other concepts related to obesity are chubby, portly, fat, stout, being piggish, the butterball, I love the little butterball toddlers, rotund, which is sort of a polite description, and or fleshy, which is not as commonly used nowadays. Now, gourmandizing is eating gluttonously, that you gorge or you devour your food. And there's a classic Shakespeare quote, and I cannot find it. I had it once, and I tried to find it again, the exact verbiage, because Shakespeare speaks Elizabethan. It was something to the effect of, thou that gourmandizes is one step away from the grave. So even in Shakespeare's time, we knew that overeating led to shortening your lifespan. It was not healthy for you. Anyway, a little cartoon here. He said he'll give us the treasure if we let him eat one of the fat, juicy butterballs. I think he means you, Carl. So, kind of comical. Anyway, and of course, we love the fat, meaty turkey, so we call it butterball turkey. Anyway, the NIH in 1993 started getting into this, and their awareness started increasing. Defined obesity as a state of excessive accumulation of body fat. I think they'd be more technical and would have said adipose tissue. But either way, overweight, which is having an excessive amount of body weight, which could include muscle, bone, fat, and water. So if I have somebody in congestive heart failure, that weight is excessive, or if I have a muscle-bound weightlifter, or a very large, somebody from the Marshall Islands who is very big boned, they may be technically overweight, and we'll get into treatment and assessment later, via their BMI, but they're not necessarily fat. So obviously you have to have the adipose tissue to be in the obesity range. Another general definition of obesity is excessive percentage of adipose tissue relative to the height, weight, age, and bone structure of the individual. So that one's kind of nice because it's a relative sense of what's right. Certainly a little punch ball toddler is not a bad thing, because they obviously need that extra weight because they're going off in the growth spurts. And the little toddler that tends to get quite plump right before they start crawling like crazy, and then they lean out as they start crawling like crazy. So some of it's not bad. So I like this one because it defines it relative to the situation. Now, let's start in the history. In prehistoric times, Stone Age carvings described massive obesity. And since the time of the Roman Empire, obesity was described frequently. So this isn't a new concept. Obesity existed in the past, um, and somewhat may have been glamorized in art as we know it. There's an 800-year-old Japanese painting that shows a morbidly obese woman with individuals helping her walk. So even back then, it was a health problem to be morbidly obese. Now, why made artwork about it? I don't know, but it's an 800-year-old painting that's just survived that long. That depiction leads to one to the assumption that the Japanese at that time viewed obesity as unhealthful. They didn't show it as a glamour, they were helping the person. Now, anthropologically, lower body obesity is carved in statues over 30,000 years old. Various Venus statues found throughout Europe show profound lower body obesity. Venus de Milo. This was the beautiful woman you're seeing in this picture here. The voluptuous, beautiful woman was thicker. She's not gargantuan, don't get me wrong, but she would be thicker and have bigger torso, bigger lower portion of her body. Lower body obesity was evidently not considered unhealthy or unattractive. This was the beautiful woman they were painting in the painting. Ancient Greece author Plato, this is the 5th to 4th century BC, wrote, a healthy diet. Okay, this is one of the major authors of the time. He was the guru. A healthy diet consists of cereals, legumes, fruits, milk, honey, and fish. However, this is 4th to 5th century BC. Plato, hello. He didn't have the advantage of MTV, television, computers, the web to teach them stuff, college education. He said, however, meat, confectionery, and wine, meat, sugars, and wines, although he didn't put fat in there, which is interesting, should be consumed in moderation. Excess in food would lead to ailments and therefore should be avoided. So it's good to eat healthy, it's good to eat a mix, but it should only be in moderation. Meat, sugars, and liquor. I don't know if they had the deep fried concept back then or not, or I'm sure it would have been on his list. And that it's okay to eat, but don't be excessive. Even in that time period, we knew that wasn't healthy. Now, the Greco-Roman period, even the times of Hippocrates, there was thought to be a value to dietary restriction. In his text, it states that sudden death is more common in those who are naturally fat than in the lean. Now, it's interesting, he thought fat was a natural state. But nevertheless, he did take note that people didn't live as long and had more health issues if they were overweight. It is also noted that obesity was a cause of infertility and menses was reduced. So he was doing some scientific information back then to understand that. It was thought that the accumulation of fat closed the uterus to the admission of seminal fluids. Okay, now we know that one's a little off there. But we know that to this day, if you're overweight, you can't get pregnant, you should lose some weight. If you're too skinny and you can't get pregnant, you should gain some weight. So even back in Roman Empire time period, they knew that weight affected fertility. Hippocrates' recommendation for treatment. He said, he was the father of medicine, remember? Obese people and those desiring to lose weight should perform hard work before food. In other words, if you exercise like crazy, it's okay to eat more. So if you want to lose weight, exercise like crazy. Meals should be taken after exertion and while still panting from fatigue, which is interesting because, right after you exercise, your appetite drops off. But we'll get into that when we talk about pathophysiology. And with no other refreshments before meals except only wine, okay, which was commonly drunk in that time period, but diluted and slightly cold. Okay, so we're a little off here, but the point is he got the concept that you need to exercise and minimize what you eat. Their meals should be prepared with sesame or seasoning and other similar substance and be of a fatty nature as people get unsatiated with little food. Okay, Now, this is interesting. It kind of supports my research. When you exercise, we'll get to this later when we talked about pathogen and exercise, you tend to want to eat more fat because it sticks with you longer. It lasts longer, so your appetite doesn't pick back up as soon. So even back then, they saw a pattern to how you ate and what patterns benefited you, which was very interesting, and yet we're not practicing what he preached even back then. As the Roman Empire declined, the Arabic word influenced scholarly activity. Galen's regime to reduce obesity included. So even over time, scholarly activity continued. Procure a rapid descent of the food from the stomach and intestines in order to prevent complication of absorption by the mesentery. Okay, this is the gut ones that are taking the laxatives to try and lose weight. But they understood if it doesn't. Now, who knows what their pattern is? We know that people that are naturally constipated and don't poop on a regular basis, or we know they're more prone to cancer, but also you have a more efficient GI system. You're more likely to gain weight versus those people that poop 2 or 3 times a day. And they said, take food which is bulky but feebly nutritious. So we know fiber is good. They kind of saw that. Take the bath before food often. Not sure what that does, but I guess if you're not eating and you're bathing, that's a good thing. Or maybe just go to bed after your bath and don't eat. And then, of course, hard exercise. So even back in that time period, they realized if you hold on to the food longer, you're going to gain weight. If you have more fiber, that's decent. If food moves food cracker is probably what they were thinking. And we're not sure about the bathing thing, but hard exercise was good. Now, during the medieval period, mortality plays were popular entertainment because obviously people didn't live well. But gluttony was one of the cardinal sins and frequent in themes of plays. So it was thought to be sinful and evil to be gluttonous during that time period. Medieval, if you gorged yourself, it was not good. Kind of like having blonde hair and, some plastic augmentation nowadays is considered wonderful. That time period, they frowned upon gluttony. The emphasis on, these are fashions of the time. Emphasis on excess, greed, and lack of self-restraint and gluttony. So current time period, there is we have contests for see who can eat the most hot dogs, and they win large purses of pockets. Restaurants will brag about how large the plates are giant. The whole ambiance, what we're training ourselves to say what's popular now is really gluttonous related. 90% of the commercials are food related. But in medieval time period, it was the opposite. People would have frowned and not purchased things if they were related to gluttony type thing. Being in self-constraint was good. The sin was in consuming more than needed and leaving others without. Everybody was living minimally and barely surviving to a large degree. So it would be sinful to grab all the food that was available and see other people next to you doing without. Body size or shape was not factors in gluttony, and being overweight carried no implication of sin. So it wasn't that you were overweight was the factor and the problem. The problem was gorging. So it was a different way they looked at it. Now, the art I'm showing you here is attacked by hypocrisy and gluttony. So they even had art talking about, so this evil creature here is gluttony, and he's attacking this person. They're being hypocritical. Now, 1607, an important aphorism for good health came out of Salerno, Italy. They had advertisements. 1607, an important aphorism, I'm probably not saying that correctly, for good health came out of Salerno, Italy. Never eat without hunger or drink without thirst. Okay. I would be really skinny if that was the case, because I always eat whether I'm hungry or not. Come on, raise your hands, whoever's listening to this. When's the last time you ate because you were actually hungry and not because you looked at the clock or you passed by the counter and there was the food, or it just sounded like a good thing? You actually didn't have stomach pains or that slight headache or some physiological need to go eat. Most of the times I'm just, lunchtime, let's go. Anyway, so if you do that, you won't gain weight. I had an au pair that lived with us from Czech Republic. She'd been au pair in England, and she showed me a picture. She had gotten really fat. But when she came to me, she was this cute little petite thing, perfect. Not too skinny, not too fat, just perfect. All thin and muscular. And she was worried because she was coming to America that she'd gain weight. And so it's interesting when she told me, she goes, I'm waiting till I'm hungry. Because it was lunchtime or dinner time. I was like, you ready to eat? She goes, no. She would wait till she was hungry, and that's how she managed her weight. Anyway, so never commence one meal before the preceding meal has been digested, and be moderate in everything. Okay, hello, decent advice. If you just do this, just this, we'd all have normal weight. Quite probably. Um, so never commence one meal before the preceding. And I do that. Like the other day, I went out to lunch because we were taking out some people. I had a big lunch. Well, I came home and I had a few little pieces of candy, but I didn't quite eat that dinner. I guess because I wasn't hungry. But if I'd come home in a more timely fashion, I would have scheduled cooking a dinner for the children, and I would have just sat down and ate because I scheduled a big dinner for the children. But normally, if I just go with when I'm hungry, I probably would do pretty well. So anyway, this Italian advertisement is excess is grave to health. So you want to reach the grave, you eat in excess. That's basically the message. 18th century. At this time, the symptoms the patient described were viewed as the disease. So the symptoms they had was the illness, not just symptoms. For example, we know a heart murmur is not a disease, it's a symptom. But they would have saw the murmur as an illness. Anyway, if gluttony was the problem, then abstinence from excessive eating was ordered. So if your problem was you were gorging yourself, we could cure that very simply. Boom. Stop excessive eating. Like, could work today. Of course, we know there's more to that. Exercise as well as a factor. Anyway, 1727, Thomas Short wrote that a cause of corpulency, right, that's obesity, is plenty of eatables and drinkables of a soft nature. Now think about it. Vegetables are firmer. Soft would be oily, greasy things. Smooth nature. Sugar, milk, I don't know. Sweet, fat, or oily things, and food that is easily assimilated also tends towards corpulency. So 1726, they didn't really understand the vitamins and minerals of food and what was in there, what's vitamin A, the percent of fat in something, but they knew that those that ate more of a certain had more issues. For by sloth and idleness, the natural and necessary evacuations, especially by perspiration, are diminished. The vessels are distended with fluids, and the dissension spoils or impairs the vigor of the solid. Now, interesting. So sloth, okay, so if we don't exercise well, their idea was you needed to sweat to evacuate, evidently, the excess calories. And, of course, your GI system worked better. You pooped better. You weren't constipated if you were up and about and exercising. So that's interesting. Now, they saw the vessels were distended with fluid. Well, maybe part of the obesity they saw, although then again, maybe there was more heart failure because we didn't have treatment for that at the time. So clearly they had a concept. Maybe all the stuff wasn't connected right for current physiological knowledge, but they had it down even in 1727. Now, Fleming in 1760 thought that a cause of corpulency is too lax a texture of the cellular or fatty membrane, which is interesting. But they thought about it, so they knew being fat was related to corpulency, which is the same definition, of course, but too lax of texture was interesting. He also believed that this laxity of the solids, so instead of muscle, you had fat, tended to run in families, and was thus on the first to suggest the familial basis of corpulency. And we do know our body's shape runs in families. The long, lean, gangly look versus a short, stout look, a bigger boned type person. So he started to describe that. One of Fleming's recommendations was to get up from the table while still having an appetite. Push the plate away. Amazing. 1760 had it down. He also advises limiting the variety of foods which are available at meals. Now, here he understood some of the psychosocial of it. Back in the 50s, there wasn't much in the area of obesity, but food was a lot more boring. You had pot roast on Monday, meatloaf on Tuesday, leftovers on Wednesday, chicken on Thursday. It kind of was the same every week. Mom cooked, and it was a little boring. But now it would be tacos. And when was the last time you cooked a pot roast? Think about it. It's really boring. It's nutritious. You got carrots, you got potatoes, you got the meat. You're done. But nobody ever gorges, generally, nobody ever gorges on pot roast because it's boring. Anyway, so push the food away from the table. So if you limit the varieties and the excitement of what's available, one will eat less. And if you go back to my dissertation, we'll talk about later, we offered a buffet. And the first entry to the buffet, the children ate much more. When they came back the second time, they didn't eat as much because they'd seen all those foods before. It lacked the excitement. Anyway, roots, green, or other succulent vegetables are also recommended, but with sparing use of butter. 1760, we knew if you filled your plate full of veggies, you did well, but you didn't want to cover them in grease. 1760. Most current concepts for current obesity research began in the 19th century. So really in the 19th century, we started looking into this more. Cells were identified as the building blocks by this time. Fat cells were described, and too many fat cells were suggested to lead to obesity. So we now knew what a fat cell was. We knew more, obviously. Calorimetry was developed and weight standards in the 19th century. Now we're starting to get a lot more science involved, just not observational, intellectual observation. The idea of developing a normal range of values to compare things was developed. 19th century. The medical emphasis of the overweight was on helping to maintain a steady weight. Ooh, interesting. We don't pay a lot of attention to that. We talk about people going up and down and yo-yoing. And if you realize there's very little research on the yo-yo. Is it good, bad, or evil, or okay to gain a bunch and lose a bunch? What's the issues with that versus just maintaining? Steady weight was a good thing. The goal was to regulate appetite, not thinness. Interesting, because we're all talking about our body, but it's okay to be a little chubby. It may just be your body physique, but as long as you're maintaining kind of the same, and you don't gorge yourself, you're just eating your routine eat, is that not better? Weight above average represented a reserve that could be used in the event of illness. So as we know, and you've all probably seen this, well, the trauma, this thin teenage trauma that comes in, ends up really gaunt and it breaks down muscle because they had no extra fat. So a little bit of plumpness is good to conserve. Now, when we talk about assessment, the health range, too thin, we joke, too much money, too thin is never a problem, but it is. They don't do as well long-term health-wise either. Sylvester Graham, who traveled the lecture circuit in the mid-19th century, advocated vegetarianism and moderation in diet. So even back then, we knew more vegetables were good. His listed gluttony as the greatest of all evils. 19th century, you don't hear that today. If anything, like, wow, you ate that? We'll have a Super Bowl party. It's all about food. We'll have a baby shower. It's about food. We'll have Thanksgiving dinner. It's all about everything we talk about is glam. Every magazine, as you're going through the grocery store, has food, some sort of recipe on the front cover. But no, they actually talked about gluttony as being evil. Obesity became a moral issue because he told the public that obesity was evidence of gluttony. So gluttony was evil, being obese was evidence of gluttony, so obesity was evil, 19th century. Now, 1800 to 1850s time period, they began to describe obesity related to illness. We got the Prader-Willis syndrome. We know it's the genetic, and they're retarded, and they have an uncontrolled appetite, and they tend to be overweight. Pickwickian, the famous Pickwickian Pickwickian was a character around Shakespeare's time in a book, and so we called it the syndrome, where people just fall asleep sitting up because they obviously were snoring all night and not getting any sleep. It's called Pickwickian syndrome, and the morbidly obese when they just middle day and they'll fall asleep. It was often written as a moral weakness to be obese. So it's a character flaw to let yourself get overweight, to have lack of control. Gosh, was this Monty Python? I think it's Monty Python. I got this picture out. It's a famous movie, and this is the guy that just keeps gorging and vomiting and gorging and vomiting, and the waiter keeps feeding him. It's a classic movie. Um, so we're dealing with this huge, huge, huge. I'm using a pun here. Issue in America right now because people have they're wearing their sleep apnea things at night, and a lot of this is weight related. A good percentage is weight related. I had a faculty I worked with at another university, and she was morbidly obese, and she was falling asleep during like physical assessment classes for the students. And they're doing their assessments. She'd sit there and she'd fall asleep through the day. During faculty meetings, she'd fall asleep, and everybody's like, and she was having these heart palpitations. And finally, a doctor got bright enough to figure out, she had sleep apnea. And so she was so exhausted during the day that she was starting to fall apart from lack of sleep because you can't constantly mess up your sleep cycle. And the stress of it was literally killing her. So she got sleep apnea equipment and started losing weight, and all her problems went away. Well, probably not all the problems, but she got much better. Anyway, Victorian typer, now we see the switch, 1840 to 1900. Before then, we knew early we knew gormandizing was bad. Then it got to the point where it was evil and morally unacceptable. But now, fashion, the Victorian time period, favored a rotund body shape. Fashion's changed. Meals might be 7 courses. Overweight symbolized the overdone elegance of this era. If you had wealth, a wealthy businessman should have a fat wife, or he's not successful. People had special feathers so they could go out in the backyard, gag, vomit, and return to eat. So if you had a big fancy dinner party, this is where all the fancy different pieces, the sterling that's out there in antique stores, the 7 or 8 spoons, there's something for everything, all the pretty table settings. We didn't have TV yet, so you would socialize and party because you had more leisure time, more wealth, and have these grand parties. So you can see this as a table setting that might be the food served at a Victorian dinner party. Quite the fun. So you'd eat, and then you'd get so full you have to go out in the backyard and throw up so you can come back and eat again and enjoy the party. At the turn of the century, scientists believed body fat had its origin in the fat of food consumed. So they thought somehow you ate the fat and the fat just went to your hips, which we joke about, of course. Food was thought to pass unchanged, absorbed, and deposited on the body. So I guess you got like a banana over here and a Snicker bar over there type of thing. Anyway, excessive body fat was a sign of eating too much fat. So they were directly correlating fat to fat. Now we know you can eat too much sugars and it'll turn to fat, but at the time, this was the belief system. You began to see cartoons making fun of the overweight. Oh, who was that president? It was so huge. They talked about him breaking the back. I think I'll get to that later. Anyway, the word stout became uncomplimentary, and fat began to be considered ugly. So really, being fat itself, if you go back further, was not the ugly feature. It was the gormandizing. It was being a glutton that was considered unattractive and evil. They just knew fat was because of it, and those that were fat would die early or not do well health-wise. But now, actually being overweight started being unattractive. 19th, 20th centuries continued growth about knowledge about obesity. The term corpulence and polysarca have been replaced by obesity, the new verb. Here's some lingerie, attractive at the time, I'm sure. 1908, French designer Paul Poret introduced a new body-revealing style for women. So before that, the fashion, it didn't matter if you're kind of pudgy under there, but body fat is unfashionable. Now you need that little waist. The look you're looking for changed. 1912, Cushing published the first scientific monograph identifying the importance of obesity as a disease in the United States. So 1912, it falls into the illness disease category, something that needs to be managed. Here's a guy, President Taft. President Taft, 1909, 1913, he was 6'2" and 355 pounds. Now that was freaky at the time. Now we're seeing that every day. I mean, you cannot walk down the street and not see that in America. But he was the ridicule of many jokes and newspaper cartoons. They picked on him unmercifully. It was the first time there was widespread pressure to be thin. I mean, 6'2", 355, he should be 205. Anyway, Theodore Roosevelt remarked that Taft should give up riding because it was doing him no good and because it was cruelty to the horse. 355 on a horse. More Taft jokes, only because it's entertaining. Justice Brewer of the Supreme Court said that Taft is the politest man in Washington. The other day he gave up his seat in the streetcar to 3 ladies. So right now we're picking on it. It's okay now. We opened the door to making fun of fat. After Taft lost the election of 1912, Yale University offered Taft a chair of law. Taft replied that a chair would not be adequate, but after the university would provide a sofa of law, it might be all right. So even Taft dove into his puns. Anyway, actuarial tables. 1912, about, right? 1912, Taft's president. Now we start defining things. 1912 study of more than 350,000 insurance policyholders provided height and weight mortality. So insurance companies, since the beginning of time, have been okay to say, listen, if we're going to insure you, we're going to charge you based on your risk and what you're going to cost us. You can't walk in here dying of cancer and buy life insurance, right? We want a risk analysis and we'll pay. We know age is an issue, so obviously your life insurance is more the older you get. But also, if you don't meet certain criteria, for example, when my husband and I got life insurance, long-term disability insurance a few years back, was funny, as they didn't care about me. They drew blood out of my husband. They weighed him. They know that guys were more likely to be, actually, I think they got both our weights, but they didn't draw any blood out of me. Because they were looking for his cholesterol. They wanted to know where he was at, because the risk factors were higher. He was going to cost them money than me. So now this is the database for the actuarial tables. So 1912 is the gold standard of what we say today a BMI is or isn't shouldn't be. It was the first large-scale evidence of the relationship between body weight, health, and mortality. They knew the death rate as the weight went up was higher as you got older. So the public learned that excess body weight was a liability. It was going to cost you more, not an asset. It was an extra to conserve. So here's your dinosaur getting extinction insurance. Now, powerful events precipitating policy shifts in national food and nutrition policies. So this is the more recent time period. World War I had a big influence. The Great Depression had a big influence. World War II, and certainly our current obesity epidemic. You have this kind of down period between World War II, the 1940s, and the 70s. In times of scarce food, fashion generally declared that being overweight was a sign of prosperity and well-being. A large person was envied. So if you could afford to be overweight during the Great Depression, people, were jealous. In time culture, when food was plentiful, fashion has favored the slim, lean figure. So, this is in general, obviously. World War I. Literally advertisements. Here's your advertisement. Don't waste while your wife saves. Adopt the doctrine of the clean plate. Do your share. So even if you're a business guy in World War I and you're going out, don't order more than you're going to eat. And eat, clean your plate so you're not wasting. World War I rationing occurred and conservation efforts. They showed posters and slogans that it was patriotic to be thin in 1917. You were a good citizen if you were thin. Public opinion at the time showed people fat were self-indulgent, uncaring, and about the troops and others' hardships. So if you were fat, you weren't a good citizen, you were selfish, and what were you thinking was sort of the attitude. And certainly it was un-American and wasteful. Right now it's sort of American to be overweight. But back then it was, how awful type of thing. Now, 1920s and 30s. Some researchers thought that obesity was genetic at the time. They thought fatness was dominant and thin recessive, which is interesting. So the more Americans it occurred, the fatter we get because the dominant would slowly roll over. Also, people who were overweight were considered to be either exogenous people who overate but had firm muscles and in good health. They were considered to be cheerful, happy, and usually men. So basically, exogenous, I guess, were the muscle-bound guys. Firm muscles, they could eat a lot, and they were in a good mood and happy with their firm muscles was somehow the thought here. Endogenous people had a deficient metabolism, flaccid muscles, assuming fat is flaccid, poor health, and they were sad or sour in nature and generally women. So, of course, here we go, picking on the women as usual. And of course, if they had Valium, they'd pump them in full of that too. But so at least they knew that if you were muscle bound, it was okay to eat more because you were burning it and you were some sort of athlete. And those that just were more just hanging around getting fat may be sad because they're fat. Somehow they're connecting that. And sour in nature, which is funny. Motion pictures now a popular culture. Okay, movie stars were attractive and then thin. So at the 1920s and 30s, attractive was thin, and they made those people the movie stars. So endless weight loss diets flowed from California to help fans look like movie stars. So now we're getting into commercialism of weight management right in the 1920s, 1930s. Before then, it was literally just some government things, even in the Roman Empire time period. But now we got the ability to mass market. So all sorts of California type things came out because you want to be as if all people in California are gorgeous, which we know is not true because that's where the movie stars came from. 1940s, new height and weight tables published by Metropolitan Life Insurance Company. Largely the ideal weight. Charts said it was not okay to gain weight with age. Wow. Historically, we thought as you get older, you'll get a little fatter, and that's kind of okay. But the 40s was like saying, no, not for survival and health reasons. 1944, researchers at the University of Minnesota find that yo-yo dieting can damage health. Hello. At least one study that this is not good to tear your body down at fast speed and then gain weight again. In 1945, Louis Reard, a Paris fashion designer, invents the bikini. God help us, the bikini. It totally wins popularity in the 60s with the beach party movies. So now you kind of got to look good in the bikini. You can't just cover it up with that tight one-piece thing that pushes the roll in. 1948, Framingham, Mass. Heart surgery study begins. That's been repeated. Studying risk factors for cardiovascular diseases. Now we're tying in the extra adipose tissue with plaque buildup. Anyway, came up with overfatness. So it might be overweight, but not over fat. Okay, so overweight could be the muscle-bound guy. Overweight is separated from just being obese. Now we've got two ranges. Focus shifted from measuring food intake to measuring body fatness. Skin fold calipers appeared. 1940s, got the little pinch the fat percentage. Psychological theory decreed that there was an underlying psychological basis for overeating. It's coming from somewhere. It's not just genetic. There's a driving force to do this. Maybe depression could be a factor. We know in some people it is. Lack of self-esteem, okay, for some people that's a factor. Or boredom, something to do. It cracks me up when you go to the Hearst Castle and it's interesting because now when there's a party, the adults sit around and drink and eat. The children play. But if you go to see these museums and different places of an earlier time period, it's interesting. They sort of hid the kids, or they sent the kids somewhere else to play, but the adults actually play. The adults were playing tennis, they were playing volleyball, they were swimming. The adults did activities together, which I find interesting and you don't see today. Rarely at a swim party the adults get in. Sometimes the dads might get in a little bit, but it's not so common. Anyway, they learned that support group systems also helped. So things that helped. And here's a little flyer, why advertisement. Why is eating in wartime? Okay, in the 50s. 51 was a turning point. Campaign against obesity taken up by the U.S. government. Government's getting involved. And medical establishment. 1950 the Jack LaLanne Show. Famous guy. What did he die recently in his 90s? Premieres on television, making fitness a household world. So now you can see on TV, first time, every woman in every house can actually exercise in her living room. We didn't think about doing that before. And of course you had the Marilyn Monroe, the beautiful one, a little voluptuous. She wasn't gaunt thin, but she wasn't obese either. That was the look. But then we hit the 60s. Twiggy came in. Gaunt came in. 1963, Jean Nidich, with a lifelong weight problem, starts Weight Watchers, 63, international, Personally, I'm biased toward Weight Watchers because it teaches you portion controls. In a storefront after deciding to commercialize a food plan that helped her shed 72 pounds. So she took something she did, marketed it, turned it into a business. Late 60s, aerobics added to American lexicon. There was a new word. Sit at home and dance around. Added to Webster Dictionary, just like Twitter. Certain words got recently added to the dictionary. Texting and twitting. Big trend throughout the 70s. Doing aerobics actually got even bigger in the 80s, for that matter. But it started in the 60s and continued through the 70s and 80s. 1960s, started writing prescriptions for amphetamines for weight loss. Okay, we know that wasn't good. The Doctor Quick Weight Loss Diet was a bestseller, starting the first of many fad diets. So now the fad diets are coming out. Eating nothing but grapefruit, taking amphetamines. But the Twiggy look was in. Thin, wispy, long legs. 1960s, Twiggy, British fashion model. She's 5'6" and 92 pounds. Teeny weeny, thin as a rail. Cheryl T, 1970. She was a hot item. 72, and she was thin. She wasn't rail thin like Twiggy. She was voluptuous but thin. Dr. Atkins' Diet Revolution became a bestseller. Everybody jumped on the Atkins diet. This was a popular low-carb diet. 74, liposuction. If you can't work it off, well, suck it off. Gotta love those liposuction people. 1979, the Complete Scarsdale Medical Diet. Dr. Herman Tarnauer and Sam Sinclair Baker became another bestseller. These books are at the bestseller market. We're all starting to gain weight, but we're buying the books. We're doing aerobics in front of the TV. Was the lane. The 80s. Now muscle tones in, having some shape, not just being thin. And exercise routines are expected. Every single person in the 80s joined a health club, worked out on some realm. It just wasn't heard of to not do that. Fitness places were popping up everywhere. Before that, the YMCA was the only place you went. It was really for the poor, and then maybe the athletically inclined for children. Now the YMCA's got competition. These places are popping up everywhere. Take control of your health. People overweight, that was a big advertising campaign. People overweight are considered not in control of themselves. Media markets, lose weight and you'll be happier, healthier, and more attractive. Okay, so if I lose weight, suddenly I'm happier. Okay, Doritos sometimes, I'll admit, make me happy. Okay, that ice cream does make me happy, but according to the marketing at the time, happier, healthier, and more attractive. Your average B class size doubles. Enrollments in sport teams drop at the same time period where everybody, all the singles are told, if you want to meet a guy, you got to go to the health club. Literally. That was a big pickup joint at the time. More than going to the bars was the 80s health spa, checking out the other working out single guys. But simultaneously, PE classes doubled because it wasn't considered important. Enrollment in sport teams dropped 88% in the 80s. Huge drop in after-school sports. And this percentage of seniors taking PE, only 48%. Seniors in high school PE requirements, gone. 1980s continue. Generally, magazine covers have some article touting diet techniques. I love this. Do it. Go to the grocery store, and almost every one of those, like Better Homes and Garden type things, will show on the cover one of the articles is about a dieting, and the other article is about like some great recipe, and it's on every magazine cover. Huge diet industry develops to help those trying to lose weight. Diet for dancers. Here's a one. Classic. A complete guide for nutrition and weight control. Yeah, obviously, if you just dance 4 hours a day, we know you're going to lose weight. Annual sales of diet products, $30 billion by the end of the 80s. But no evidence that industry has any effect on obesity in the U.S. data. So everybody's trying to make money out there. Everybody's buying these products, but statistically, it's not getting any better. It's a joke. And actually, I have a book I'm going to write. I have no time to write it, so it's probably not going to get read anytime soon, but it's called The Dog Food Diet. And basically, my dog isn't fit. He's in perfect shape. We leave the food out all day. But it's boring. If your substance to survive is the same thing every day, you'll really only eat when you're hungry. You'll really only eat what you need. So the dog food diet is to get on dog food for like 2 or 3 months, Just eat dog food. It's nutritious. My dog lives on it. He survives. He doesn't need anything else. Okay, we give him an occasional pancake, I'll admit. But basically, he survives on that. And he's not overweight. He's in great shape. And of course, he walks a couple miles a day. Anyway, so that's my book. Very short, one chapter. Anyway, so we have no evidence that's getting billions of dollars spent on diets, advertisement. Do you know how many videotapes I have and CDs on aerobic exercise things that I never use? Anyway, 80s continued. 1983, the 1970s pop singer idol Karen Carpenter dies of anorexia nervosa at the age of 32. Suddenly, we're bringing national focus to this eating disorder. So there's a lot of social pressure on those to be thin, and mentally, not everybody can handle it. And those that go to the extreme mental picture of dieting and starving, basically. 1987, TV talk show diva Oprah Winfrey lost 67 pounds on a liquid formula diet. She died on national TV, and everybody followed her. And everybody loves Oprah. She's the glamour queen of daytime television. Everybody loves her. And there was a huge portion of people there, huge again, following her diet. Of course, she eventually regains the weight, and then some. So it was kind of, it's kind of like whatever, like Kardashian, they got married recently. I think, we all followed it. We enjoyed following her wedding, and then quickly she divorced after, 70 days. So overweight people in the media put usually as support person, not main role in the 80s. If there's somebody overweight on the show, they're never the glamour mid person. There's some sort of peripheral side person. So the image is still the glamour image. Now, ultra skinny revitalized in the 1990s by Kate Moss. This model, we saw her bones. The ultra thin became an issue. Now we see in the early 2000s, everybody knows it's dangerous, and anorexia has gathered attention. So fashion models need a little more bulk. And actually, my daughter follows America's Top Model. And one of the shows, I know they put this on purpose, they kicked a girl out because they saw too many ribs. And they were like, no, that's not safe. You need to gain weight. You're not a good model. So too thin, now they realize the problem. In the 1990s, that became ultra cool. 1994, American Society of Plastic and Reconstructive Surgeons reported that 51,000 liposuction procedures were conducted. In that, 50,000 people are getting it sucked off. I had a cleaning lady, and you don't even have to be rich. My cleaning lady in Connecticut, who was obese, spent $5,000. And you're going to pay cash for that for liposuction. And what's interesting, she goes, I can't tell any different. Because they can't suck off everything at once, or it will kill you. There's a whole issue with vascular, and you can only take off so much. Well, she was so overweight anyway that the difference was moderate at best. I have a girlfriend that had liposuction because she was dating the plastic surgeon, and she had her hips liposuction. And he said, you're the type of person we want, because she was the type that just had that little extra fat pad on her hips, even though she was thin. And he goes, because then he's actually sculpting and changing her look. But when you're overweight, if you just take off some, you're just slightly less overweight. It didn't change your overall look. Anyway, so my poor cleaning lady was very disappointed and spent $5,000. They sucked off, 25 pounds, and she still felt fat. Anyway, 1995, the FDA advisory panel votes to support Redux, paving the way for eventual FDA approval. So now we're starting looking for a pill. It's a big problem here. Finally, people are paying attention, and they're looking for a quick pill, though. The typical American quick fix. We don't want to have to actually quit eating and exercise. 1996, National Association of Anorexia Nervosa and Associated Disorders estimates that 8 million Americans, mostly young Caucasian women, suffer from either anorexia or bulimia. 8 million? This is huge. Somewhat hidden in society, but a big problem. Huge problem. Another huge problem. 1996, body mass index emerges as standard definition of obesity. So BMI, standard procedure to say weight issues. 1990s continued. Start to see people sue over obesity discrimination. Hello. To health professionals, employers, and businesses. Discriminated because they're overweight. Now it's a way to gain money. It's like one new thing. A woman in Pennsylvania sued a movie theater because the seats weren't big enough. Interesting. We'll leave a space, like in a movie theater and stuff, for a wheelchair. But is it the theater's responsibility to have a place for obese? Now, airplanes, you can justify charging more because everything's a weight issue because it costs money to get the plane off the ground. But if you're a restaurant and everything's a booth and they can't sit into the booth, can they sue because there's no place for them to sit? You want their business because obviously they're going to eat. Or do you now have to design around that? And you do. You actually, I was over, I forget what hospital. We had our post conference in one of the rooms. And I'm like, this room is so weird. It was like a cartoon room and all the chairs were big. And I realized that's where they had their obesity meetings for the surgical consults. And so they had a whole series of chairs in there for the extra large. It was funny. Because we were like, this is weird. It looks funny because your visual wasn't the norm. So currently obesity is stigmatized. The obese are generally blamed for their status. And we know it's a society issue. It's the culture around. It's hard to survive in America and avoid. It's impossible. You're driving down the street. There's fast food everywhere. And then you go to Costco. Everything's prepackaged, which is greasy and salty. I mean, and we're busy. We have commutes. It's hard to cook that pot roast every night, which was healthy and not so easy to gorge on. Anyway, but the individual's blamed for their status. Is obesity a disease or a self-imposed lifestyle? There's the magic question. If you can get it declared a disease and it's protected under the American Disability Act, oh, now we've got a gimmick. Insurance can bill for it and bill for treatment. Part of the problem of healthcare is you just tell people to exercise and lose weight, but there's no, again, it's something you need to do yourself, not government pay for, or your insurance company pay for. Now what we're seeing in the 2000s is employers saying, and it's happening to my sister, she works in a hospital in Oklahoma, that if you're overweight, your lipids are not in control, or you smoke, then you pay more health insurance. Why should everybody else pay for what's your responsibility? Now you can have elevated lipids as long as you're putting them in control. So, because people obviously genetically may just have that, but your weight should be managed, and even though you have elevated lipids, they should be managed, and you should follow the regime. So it's interesting, they're making you pay more, just like the life insurance policies have always done. It's been acceptable, but that's new. Okay, 2000, Britney Spears is the hot ticket. Thin is still in. Obesity declared at the same time a national epidemic and only getting worse. So you got a lot of pressure to be thin on the young and quote beautiful. We have issues with anorexia and bulimia for girls trying to achieve a physique that maybe not their nature and still wanting to be able to gorge on the side. And so we have an epidemic, but thin is still the fashion beauty norm. So what's the future? It's starting to change. Actually, here in the 2000s. At the same time, we want to be Britney. There's TV shows glamorizing and putting forward the obese. Currently incredibly indulgent in our eating patterns. Tolerant of overweight status. If you ask, I love it, I had a patient in the hospital, he's very overweight. Not morbid obese, but that big, thick kind of guy that it looks muscular because it's so thick, but he's in his 60s and it's just fat. That's not what he looked like when he was 21. His wife said, he's not fat, he's just a big guy. And I'm like, no, he's fat. So our vision of norm is starting to skew. I was in, where was I? Not Tampa, Florida, Key West, Florida. And, I'm an old lady and I got some rolls and I'm like, well, I'm not going to wear a bikini, but we're down in Florida. Nobody knows us. So I still brought the more modest swimsuit and a cover up. We're walking around downtown and here I am, an old lady. I'm like, why am I covering up? Oh, these little bebopping teenagers looked way worse than I did. And their little heinous bikinis just showing off those rolls. I'm like, oh my God, when I was their age, I would have never they're glamorizing their fat. They're okay with it. The muffin top doesn't bother them, the roll hanging over their tight pants. I was like, oh my God, if I had a roll hanging over like that, I would never wear those tight pants. So although everybody says, and it's considered prettier, we're getting comfortable with our weight. And we're criticizing it. We know we're verbalizing to lose, but we're okay. We're having a whole fashion model line now to meet the money's there because the people have the weight, so we're coming up with clothes for them. This is a fashion model the society got very upset at, and that started the trend of too thin models need to be ousted. You have to have some body mass because this was obviously unhealthy. Look at her. But is this good either? This is an unhealthy woman as well. So not only that we are uniquely aware of this, we are uniquely aware of the health risks. Yet this woman's a model. She's an obese fashion model. Here she has lingerie. Here she has a woman's clothes. But there's a market. Overweight people need clothes. Obviously, that's a market. You shouldn't just put a thin person in there. And it's considered beautiful. The woman's got a beautiful face. And comfortable with that. So fit and fat is, we'll talk about that later. Anyway, weight watching and body image concerns are an integral part of America in the 21st century. Sexy at any size is a new, how did I get that backwards? I don't know how I did that. Anyway, sexy at any size is kind of the new advertisement. Increase the public knowledge of health risks associated with obesity. Healthcare professionals need to approach the subject and separate the social stigma from the health-related needs. So it's okay to be pretty in a nice fashionable sweater, here she is, and a pretty skirt. That's okay. But there's health risks with the extra weight, and we need to deal with that as well. So one of the things in the mantra I'm hoping you get in this class is social acceptability, social norms, and our opinion on, ooh, she's fat, needs to be separated from we're healthcare people, let's just deal with the health risks. Two different issues. Now, has the high recidivism rate, failure to keep weight off, influenced issues? Current studies need to be initiated to see if yo-yoing has as many or different or worse health risks than maintaining overweight or obese status. Is it worse on your body to tear it down and then 2 years later gain the weight back and rapidly lose weight? One of the videos I was considering you guys watching is a guy that went on a juice fast, just a vegetable juice fast, and lost a lot of weight fast. I'm like, oh, it took him years to gain that weight. And to lose it rapidly in a 6-month time frame is a tearing down of your body. And we need to learn more about that. Anyway, I think that finishes off our show for you guys. Bring your questions to class. It's just an interest. Give you a little historical perspective here so you get a feel of what's out there, what's the history, what's the background of this interesting and now #1 health risk in the United States.